Well, hello, this is Jeff Gaudiosi, and you're on MisplacedStraws.com, where music comes to life. And my guest today is the founding guitarist of one of the more unique bands in rock history. Firefall is probably best known for their string of 70s hits that have really seen a rebirth in the age of yacht rock. But they're about to release a brand new record called Friends and Family on September 22nd, and it sees them covering a load of classic bands whose histories are pretty intertwined with their own. Here to talk
Right.
about all of it, please welcome Jock Bartley. Welcome, Jock.
Hello, sir. How's it going?
Doing great. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be had.
So I think in order to really understand the friends and family reference of the new record, people need to understand the history of your band.
Right.
It's like you actually replaced one of my favorite guitarists, Tommy Bolin, and Zephyr. You
Oh,
played with Graham Parsons.
right.
Talk a bit about the original lineup of Firefall and the resume that you guys all brought to the band.
Well, I will. And basically, that's where Friends and Family came from. About a year and a half ago, when Mark Andes was still in the band, our manager and our record label said, you know, some of the original members of Firefall played in a lot of other famous bands. And Mark was a big part of that. The Byrds, the Flying Breeder Brothers, Spirit, JoJo Gunn, Dan Fogelberg, Hart, in my case, Graham Parsons. And Lynn suggested that we do an album of their material. And as soon as he said that, I went, that's a great idea, but let's expand that a little bit. In 1976, when Firefall's first record came out and went gold really fast, and we started touring with everybody, I said, in 76, we toured with the band, with Levon Helm and Robbie Robertson, the Doobie Brothers, Fleetwood Mac during the White Album before Rumors, Loggins and Messina, Leonard Skinner, Marshall Tucker, on and on and on. Let's include a song from some of those bands too. And he said, that's great. Excuse me. What's interesting is as soon as that concept came up, I knew that picking the songs, we had to do that very carefully because some of the songs were off limits in my mind. Like, for instance, Lynn said when he heard we toured with the band on their last tour before they went out and made the movie The Last Waltz and broke up, he said, the band, oh, that's great. You guys can do Up on Cripple Creek. And I went, no friggin' way. I said, Levon Helm is really the only guy that should ever sing that song. And when we were trying to pick the Heart song, which Mark Andes was in Heart for a long time, and we toured with Heart for years in the 70s, somebody suggested, hey, let's do Barracuda. And I went, nah, Barracuda is not one that we can do. So I knew that each one of those songs we picked, we needed to be careful. And the main thing we needed to do was have our version honor the original, be respectful of the original. And also what this album is honoring that time in music, the late 60s and the 70s in American music, which will really never be duplicated again. Back then in the 60s and 70s, record labels didn't have their hands on your throat, and the songs you did and how you sounded. And when you made an album, they were pretty much hands off, and you turned it in and they put it out, and that really led to, bands like the Eagles and Dan Fogelberg and Firefall and Little River Band and Little Feat. And I mean, when you think about some of the great American bands like Steely Dan, they were like nobody else, but they were fantastic, and that's when record labels pretty much kind of let the bands do what they did. And then in the 80s, it got like, no, we want you to do this song, or you should sound like this, or it all tried to get a lot more commercial, and, and record labels kind of took over, and bands and songs and writers kind of suffered. But it was really pretty amazing because when that concept for Friends and Family came up, I knew that we had some of the very, very best songs of the late 60s and 70s to choose from. You know, and Firefall always had great songs. I'll tell you a real quick story. Our original band, which was Rick Roberts from the Flying Breeder Brothers, and he also played with Stephen Stills, Mark Andes from Heart, Spirit to start with, JoJo Gunn, later Heart, Dan Fogelberg, and Mark has played with everybody. He's since retired and quit the band. Michael Clark was our drummer, who was the drummer for the Byrds, the king of 4/4. And myself, I replaced Tommy Bolin and Zephyr, and I was in Graham Parsons and Emmylou Harris and the Fallen Angels, which was interesting because I wasn't a country picker at all. But I was better than the guy they had, and I got hired and suddenly, was playing, was playing with them and stuff. So Firefall was kind of not a superstar band, but we had some name guys. Now the key to Firefall was, and I'll just tell you a story. So I met Rick Roberts. Well, this leads me into a whole nother deal. The intertwining nature of a lot of those bands and musical members and girlfriends and boyfriends that were Southern California. Everybody knows about when, Stephen Stills and Jim McGuinn and Richie Fury came from New York and moved to California. Neil Young and Joni Mitchell moved from Canada. Bernie Ledden, and a little bit later, Don Felder moved from Florida. Graham Parsons came from Florida. Don Henley from Texas. Glenn Fry from Detroit area moved out to LA. And, when you think about how many bands was Bernie Ledden in? Oh, I can think of 5 or 6 probably, but it was amazing. So when I met Rick Roberts in New York City, Rick, when he was in the Breeder Brothers about a year earlier, the Breeder Brothers, he replaced Graham Parsons in the Flying Breeder Brothers, and Chris Hillman and Rick were the Breeder Brothers for a while. And when they played in Washington, D.C., Rick heard about this fantastic female vocalist, and he went down and took a cab to hear Emmylou Harris play as a folk singer and basically discovered her. He called Chris in the hotel and said, "Chris, you gotta get down here and hear this gal. She's amazing." And Chris was already in bed after their show and said, "How dare you call me? I'm not going to come down there." And Rick said, "No, Chris, you got to come down here." So Chris Hillman gets dressed, took a cab down and saw Emmylou Harris, and they basically discovered her. And a few days or weeks later, Chris Hillman called his old buddy Graham Parsons in LA and said, "I think we found the gal you're looking for to be your female singer." Now, what's interesting about this intermeshing stuff, so when Rick Roberts was in the Flying Breeder Brothers, he wrote the song Colorado. And we did it on our Friends and Family album. Linda Ronstadt covered that song and had a huge hit with Colorado, So with Graham Parsons and Emmylou and the Fallen Angels, they wanted James Burton, who played all over the GP album, to play Telecaster on their tour. And of course, James Burton was Elvis's guitar player, and Elvis said, "You're not going out with anybody else. You're my guitar player." So they went, okay. Oh, Clarence White. Oh, love Clarence White. What a player. And he's fantastic. But he was in the Byrds then, with Roger McGuinn. Now, Clarence wasn't available. So they rehearsed in LA as the Fallen Angels without a guitar player for about a month and hired a guy kind of sight unseen at the last minute. And they got on the bus and came to Boulder, Colorado, where their first gig was. And I remember the manager of the club they played in said, "You better get your ass down here. You might get a gig." And I went, "Who with?" "Graham Parsons." Graham who? The Byrds and, Flying Breeder Brothers. "Oh, right. And I go down and I hear them play. And the next night, they had asked me to sit in with them the next night. And the interesting story with that was they figured out that they needed a good rhythm guitar player. They needed a good rock guitar player to play solos, but mostly they needed a country picker like James Burton. Yeah. You know, and when the dust settled and I sat in with them and they had a meeting after that gig, they said, well, Jock is 2 out of the 3 of those, not a country picker. And the guy we got now is 0 out of 3. So 2 out of 3 wins every time, you know? So I got hired that night. And the next morning at 9 a.m. went on the bus and went down to play our first gig in Austin, Texas at the world famous Armadillo headquarters. Mm-hmm. And Neil Flans, the late great steel player, and I tried to keep dropping the needle in the bus that's bouncing around for me to try to learn James Burton's licks, you know, which I was pretty unsuccessful at. But the thing is that our next gig in Houston, Texas, we're playing on stage on our last night of that gig, and onto the stage walks Linda Ronstadt and Neil Young, both of which who knew Graham from LA. And they sat in with us. It was the first time Emmylou Harris and Linda Ronstadt ever met or sang together. Really? And Neil said, hey, I'm having a big party in my hotel suite. Come on over. You know, so after our gig, 3 bands, Neil Young's band, Linda Ronstadt's band, and Graham Parsons' band, I'll go over to Neil's hotel suite. And Graham Parsons, like he was wont to do, as soon as we got there and the drinking started and the smoking started and, you know, we're carousing in the hotel suite, Graham grabs Neil's guitar, starts playing 20 or 25 country songs. And the most amazing thing was when Emmylou and Linda Ronstadt sat face to face, really close to each other, and blended their voices together for the very first time, singing to Graham and all his country songs. And all of us watching, I mean, it was obviously incredibly magical, but we knew then that it was historic. I mean, Linda Ronstadt and Neil and Emmylou Harris singing together for the first time. And, you know, to be a fly on the wall at that thing was just so amazing. And it just goes to show, I mean, the bands, the Eagles and Poco and Buffalo Springfield and the Byrds and all those bands from Colorado, a lot of people don't realize that after a lot of those people who invented folk rock, like the Byrds, or invented country rock, like the Buffalo Springfield kind of touched into that, and the Byrds, when Graham joined the Byrds and they made Sweetheart of the Rodeo album, which was a commercial failure after all of their big rock and roll hits, you know, and along with Rick Nelson, you know, and Mike Nesmith from the Monkees, they kind of, and Poco, that, you know, and Graham Parsons, they invented country rock, you know, and it was that Southern California merging of musics. A lot of people don't know that many of those rock stars moved to the mountains above Boulder, Colorado in about 72, 73. You know, we had Caribou Ranch, the studio up the hill, and, you know, and Red Rocks was down the plains a little bit. You know, Stephen Stills, Chris Hillman, Richie Fury, Joe Walsh, Dan Fogelberg, Carl Wilson from the Beach Boys. They all bought houses above Boulder. And suddenly Boulder kind of became this mecca for music where I lived. And Rick Roberts was there, and Rick and I, started jamming together. And when Mark Andes, the bass player from Spirit, got in our jam session, suddenly it was feeling like a band and not one of Ricky's solo albums that he was thinking about making. And he said to me and Mark, he said, I know this guy in Washington, D.C., Larry Burnett, who sings and writes great songs. You want to hear a song? And we said, sure. And this was before cassette tapes were invented, of course. He put a big old reel-to-reel on, and the first song we heard of Larry's was Cinderella. And we just went, oh, get him out here. The end of this part of the story is that from our first week of practice of Firefall, we didn't have a name yet. We weren't Firefall. We were just a band. We didn't have any gigs. You know, Michael Clark was still a month and a half or 2 months away from joining the band. But in our first week of rehearsal, with Rick Roberts and Larry Burnett, the singer-songwriters, the new band had 20 or 25 original songs to work out from those guys. And the amazing thing with that was that the songs were so good that a year and a half later, when we made our first album, a lot of those songs from the first week were Mexico, It Doesn't Matter, Living Ain't Living, Cinderella. So to me, as a guitar player, the most important thing towards success of a band or an artist or whatever is the song.
Yes.
You know, and everything is about the song. And a lot of guitar players in the 70s and 80s didn't ever really learn, and they'd take solos and just, you know, just play countless notes and show off how great they were. But, you know, me having been a classically and jazz trained guitar player by the guitar maestro Johnny Smith in Colorado Springs, who had 14 records out and played with Bing Crosby and Stan Getz and all these guys from the 40s and 50s. I learned by sitting across from Johnny Smith for so many years when I was 8.5 till 14 years old, that taste and playing tastefully wasn't really what you played, is what you didn't play, the spaces you leave. And I mean, Miles Davis is probably the best example of that. He'd play one note, you know, instead of 30 notes. And, you know, people were going, oh, you know, but everything I do as a lead guitar player in my adult life and into Firefall with all these great songs, everything I played was to further the song and to help the song out. And pretty much the whole band was like that. David Muse on sax and flute and keyboards, he just at the right part. And, you know, that's why our first 3 Firefall records still sound great today and stand up, and the songs and the playing are just so amazing. And for me to have that many great songs to play when we go out on the road and play and make good money and tour around is just phenomenal. And I know that I'm fortunate and really lucky, and it's pretty humbling because, you know, we talk to fans and my wife and I got married to Just Remember I Love You, or I had a really serious illness and your song, whatever, got me through that. You know, music is the international language, and, you know, and it means so much to people in their lives that to play a small role in it, like Firefall did and I did, is just incredible.
Well, and it's funny now because when you look at some of those songs, I mean, especially, you know, like You Are the Woman and Just Remember I Love You, the songs have always had staying power. But really over the last 5 or 6 years, you know, with the explosion of yacht rock radio on, especially on Sirius XM, you guys, you're back on the radio multiple times a day with those songs. Do you see a change in your demographic now with live shows? Are you bringing in people that may not have any idea of the history you just went over, but know that you're the guys we hear on yacht rock radio?
Right. Well, yeah, and it is amazing. And I mean, I even go back further to the mid or late 80s or whatever, when the new radio format was classic rock, you know, because people got tired of hearing disco music or, you know, grunge or whatever, and they longed for the great music of the 70s. And so, you know, classic rock, and now yacht rock. It really is pretty amazing. I have seen for a long time, you know, because I'm in my 70s now and am just still fortunate to still be doing this. But our audience is 50, 60, 70-year-olds, right? But when we play, I see a lot of people that are in their 30s or their 20s, a couple in their 20s, and they're singing along with all of our songs. And I know that's because they listened to it when they were a kid with their parents, you know? But yeah, yacht rock is, is really great. I have to say that I think it's kind of funny that when you go on Facebook and look at some of the yacht rock thing, they argue very strenuously about, well, that song's not yacht rock, or this one is. Why can't you? It's like, it's really funny. There's so many kinds of music that, Firefall got pigeonholed for a number of years just because of You Are the Woman and Just Remember I Love You, AM radio hits, to being a soft rock band. But really, we're a rock and roll band that had some really big ballads. And, and we came out of that Southern California country rock, folk rock, Byrds and Stephen Stills and Crosby, Stills and Nash and the Eagles kind of thing. And we got together in Colorado, and, people didn't know what quite to call our sound of music, because it wasn't really country rock, and it was similar to maybe the Eagles or, the Little River Band or, Manassas or whatever, but we had our own distinctive sound. And a lot of people back then called it the Colorado sound, which, I'm not a big one for, naming something and having to, because a band can go wherever they kind of want to, but I know where our bread is buttered on. And believe me, when we make albums nowadays, we need now today and recently, we need to sound like Firefall. And as band leader, by gosh, I keep a really tight rein on You Are the Woman and Just Remember I Love You and Strange Way and Cinderella. They need to sound like our records as much as we can make them, because that's what people are paying money to see. But having said that, we have a lot of freedom on Me on Mexico, or the flute player on Strange Way at the end, to go new places and experiment and be spontaneous. So, Firefall is a great deal. And I'm really fortunate that we had so many great songs that people still want to hear.
Yeah. And now, will you be hitting the road soon for friends and family? And I mean, I know unfortunately we've lost Michael Clark, and David Muse passed away about a year ago, and Mark's retired. But do you think any of the original guys may pop up? Because I mean, not only do you have this new record out celebrating your history, but it's also going to be the 50th anniversary of the band. So what do you have in store for the road?
Well, we're weekend warriors now. We don't go on long tours like we did in the 70s. And we play a lot with other bands, fortunately, like, Atlanta Rhythm Section or Pablo Cruz or Orleans or Pure Prairie League or even REO Speedwagon in America. And, when you play with 3 or 4 other bands on a bill of 70s music and you're given 40 minutes to play or 45 minutes, I kind of know what 40 minutes we have to play because of the main songs of Firefall. But when we headline, we are definitely going to be playing some of these songs from friends and family. And, and I was even thinking that some of them could be our encore song or maybe a little departure in the middle of our set. That is yet to be determined. But we are going to be touring a lot this fall and winter. Weekends mostly, fly in for a gig, fly in for 2 or 3 gigs and fly home. But it's really great. And for instance, so our vocalist in the band now, Steve Weinmeister, was the lead vocalist in Firefall for like 23 years. And then he left the band for about 5 years. And now he's back, and he's got a great vocal style and sound and can sing all those Firefall songs. Our new bass player singer, who replaced Mark Andes, is a fantastic vocalist. I don't know if I've ever had an LA rock star guy in the band that can go, and sing like a rock star. But John Basaha, who is also in the band The Babies, is great. Now the Babies only work 6 or 7 shows a year. So, he joined into Firefall, and he's all over this record. And he sings the Lynyrd Skynyrd song Simple Man, and he sings the Doobie Brothers song
Long Train
Running Down the Road. No, that's what's the Doobie Brothers song?
Long Train Running.
Long Train Running. I'm sorry. I'm still drinking coffee here in Colorado. But it's really great. And for instance, when we tried to pick the heart song,
Mhm.
I already told you, I said, Barracuda was off limits. And
Mhm.
a lot of their songs, I thought, nah, that's not right to do. And John said, I could really sing the crap out of What About Love? And I went, oh, What About Love? And I'm good friends with Howard Leese, who was
Mhm.
in the original Heart. And for the last 10 years, he's been playing with Bad Company and Paul Rogers, who's one of the greatest singers ever. And John knows Howard well from LA. And I asked Howard Leese if he wanted to play the guitar solo and some power guitars on our song. He said, "Oh, that'd be great. Thanks for asking." So I emailed him out our track, and he got back to me and he said, "Well, you changed the chords on the solo a little bit, so I can't play the same solo I did." And I went, "I don't want you to play the same solo. This is a new version. You're a great guitar player. Come up with something." And that's just an example of, you know, some guest stars. Howard playing on the Heart song, and he played a brilliant solo on the first Heart record on What About Love,
Mhm.
and he played a great solo which we built up, and I played unison along with him, and we built up this thing on his choice of notes that it sounds great.
Mhm.
And I also asked my friend John Jorgensen, who's one of the best guitar players on the planet, if he'd played 12 string on Feel a Whole Lot Better by the Byrds, and it was great having, some guest stars. But I know how to make good Firefall records, and I've been asked in some interviews recently, well, did you really try to sound like Firefall on these songs? Because they're from other bands. And no, we make our songs and they kind of sound like Firefall, just like the original songs when we were getting ready for our first or second album. We never really had to try to sound like anything. We just,
It
with
just
those
does.
players
Mhm.
on those songs with those singers, that's what we sounded like, you know. And I've been really lucky in that sense. And to have this opportunity to carefully select songs by some of the best bands of the 60s and 70s, what a blessing. And it was just so much fun. And I want everybody to know that we did it with respect. We honored those bands and those songs and the 70s that those songs were part of. And like I said, the 70s, I think, will never be duplicated again, with just the wealth of material
Yeah.
and the difference of bands. Love it.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's a really fun record to listen to. I definitely encourage everyone to check it out. We've been spending some time here with Jock Bartley. The band is Firefall. The record's called Friends and Family. It's out everywhere on September 22nd. Jock, look forward to catching you on the road. Thank you so much for your time, and best of luck with this record.
Thank you. I have a scoop for you, my friend.
Yeah,
We are already 3 or 4 songs into recording Friends and Family 2.
nice.
And one of the songs I didn't include on the first Friends and Family was So You Want to Be a Rock and Roll Star by the Byrds,
Mm,
and I kind of decided I don't want to have 2 Byrds songs on this
yeah.
first album. We'll save it, and once our record label said, you guys should think about a second number, I jumped on that one. It was like, okay. And the only other song that I will tell you that we're going to be recording, and I've started the guitar tracks on it, is Stephen Still's Love the One You're With.
Yeah.
So it's another process of picking great songs,
Mhm.
honoring them, doing them in the right way, and playing, and playing them so people will love. And the interesting thing is too, is that a lot of, I mean, Christ, you could be in your 40s or 50s now and not really be hip to all the great
Yeah.
music of the 70s. So it's kind of opening up people's eyes to how good those songs by the original bands were. And the last thing I'll say is, as a lead guitar player, when I was playing some of these songs like Can't You See by Marshall Tucker, I was, in the back of my head, I was thinking of Toy Caldwell and
Yeah.
how he used to play,
Mm,
or on World Turning by Fleetwood Mac. I
yeah.
mean, Lindsey Buckingham, he's a genius, great guitar player. and I wanted to honor Lindsay. And I mean, Fleetwood Mac, when we got to tour with them during the Rumors tour, they were the biggest band in the world. And it was like, wow, why didn't I take a camera? I could have taken great pictures from the front of the stage. And when we'd play with the band, I'd be sitting behind the curtain and I'd be 10 feet away from Levon Helm playing and singing. It'd be like, man, and we're losing so many people now. I mean, Robbie Robertson just died. I put on our liner notes, I wanted to mention all the people that we miss. Christine McVie and Gary Rossington and David Crosby. And, and when the album Friends and Family went to press, Robbie Robertson hadn't died yet. But, it's just like that music, there will never be that 10 or 12 year period, I think, ever again.
Yeah, completely agree. Well, Jock, thank you so much. Best of luck with the record, and we'll catch Firefall on the road soon.
Thanks. And when the next one comes out, you and I will talk again. Thank you.
You know it, my friend.
Thank you.
Okay.